Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the episode 4 of Student to Strategist, and today I have Nathaniel with me. Nathaniel, welcome to my channel.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Nathaniel is a Foresight practitioner and MA International Relations graduate specializing in geopolitical impact of political polarizations. He has a master's degree from King's College London. I was looking forward to this particular episode because there is a lot to talk about, and hopefully we'll get some really good insight from Nathaniel. So Nathaniel, what was your experience in King's College when you were doing your master's degree?
Well, I was very lucky to be part of King's. It's a fantastic program.
Yeah.
And the part I specialized in is, well, 2 parts. One, national security strategy.
Okay.
So looking at the internal workings of the UK government, but also other governments and how they form their national security strategy. I'm sure very relevant for your future career.
Yeah.
And the second part in Russian politics, Russian foreign policy, and the way in which political polarization globally affects their policy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was an incredible experience.
Okay.
I had a great time, and I developed a lot as part of it.
Okay, nice. International threats and stuff like that, or more of like diplomacy?
I would say it's probably more on the security side than diplomacy.
Okay.
It's more about how you make the central government better, reform the way that the central government works.
Yeah.
In part, and this is some of the work that I've been doing more recently and moving into, is the way in which the central government can pick up what we call weak signals.
Okay.
So things that are small events happening somewhere in the world that don't look like much, but then suddenly they blow up into big events, right? COVID is a good example of that.
Okay.
Something's happening in China, Wuhan. We don't really know what it is yet, but it's going to affect us. And the sooner we pick up on these smaller events happening in different parts of the world, whether that's geopolitical or pandemics or anything else, the sooner we can start to develop our mitigation strategies. And so that's what national security is about. It's not just about defending against nation states like Russia, but also all these other types of security threats.
Okay, that seems very interesting. So if I were to say like something happening in Ukraine or Gaza, it's going to be a field of view to worry about.
Yes. And in particular, when you're studying national security strategy, you have to have much broader focus than you would normally studying international relations. I'm not an area specialist. I've done some studies of the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. But I'm not an area specialist on a particular country. You have to be very broad. And what your value add is understanding not necessarily the problem, but how it impacts the country. And therefore what responses you should formulate.
Okay, nice. That's some interesting insight. So in terms of when you say political polarization, so I was not familiar with the phrase, although I'm really interested in the topic. I'm not very familiarized with the whole term. Does it actually mean that international security, or is there anything else on it?
Well, some of the work I did in my master's was about connecting these two concepts. So we tend to think of international politics as to do with states and treaties and very kind of hard quantifiable things. But political polarization is affecting international relations, the way that we conduct foreign policy, in a massive way now. So just to bring it down to the concrete, political polarization is the idea that on any question, whether it's like being left-wing or right-wing or being pro-EU or Brexiteer, you get further and further and further away from the person who disagrees with you. And maybe you start to also change your emotional response to that person. You don't just think that they're mistaken, you think that they're evil, right? That's polarization, when 2 groups get further away from each other in their opinion or belief, and that difference of opinion makes them hate each other.
Yeah.
Right? And that has all kinds of really bad effects on international security.
Mm-hmm.
We see it internally within the UK with things like the Brexit debate.
Mm-hmm.
We see it across the United States, of course, in many different ways. And we see it in international conflicts, like Ukraine and Russia, like the war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And my studies and my thesis was about connecting this kind of very subtle social trend with the broader impact of geopolitical security, because fundamentally they're the same thing.
Yeah.
If we hate the person who's different from us, right? That's basically the same whether you're talking about Brexit or whether you're talking about Israel and Gaza or Lebanon or the Middle East. So it's the same psychological pattern.
Okay, cool. Okay, so in terms of obviously my interest in politics, because my country, Bangladesh, uses obviously it's a third world country, it has so many problems, and I actually want to go there and help it. So in terms of you studying geopolitics, what made you interested? Is there a story or anything? Or you are just looking to, you have an aim to go into politics in the future?
So I may regret saying this, but I don't actually aim to be a politician in the future. I'd much rather be an advisor, but I think the complexity of international relations is what drew me to it initially.
Okay.
My undergraduate degree was actually ancient history and philosophy.
Okay.
It wasn't international relations.
Was it Asian, you said?
Ancient history.
Oh, ancient. Okay,
as in Greeks and Romans and Persians and all of that, and philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some modules in international relations as well, and I did some extracurricular research in that. But I got drew into international relations really because of this connection. I started from the study of political polarization and what I was sensing around that time.
Yeah.
So you got to remember, I came of age, I was 18 when Donald Trump was elected president, when the Brexit debate was happening, and so I was sensing this kind of polarization happening in the country. So it was really from that kind of philosophical or sociological basis that I then moved into international relations and the study of it, because I noticed these same patterns playing out in, for example, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Right? And we'll get into this later maybe, but one key interesting part about that for me is the way in which Russia, and Putin in particular, will play into culture war dynamics, will actively participate in the culture war by making speeches, for example, making speeches that that parrot a lot of the same kind of ideas that are on the American right. Things to do with not liking LGBTQ people, with trying to defend the spiritual and moral foundations formed among Russians. That's like a national security imperative for them, which is very strange. So anyway, that's to go off a little bit on a tangent, but there you go. That was my interest.
Okay, nice. Moving to the next question, Nathaniel. How does Foresight help tackle challenges like political polarization and global conflict?
Sure. So one of the really good examples of the way that Foresight's used in peace building, conflict resolution, is a case study in South Africa with a man called Adam Kahane. So Adam Kahane was working for Shell, the oil company, in London, and Shell are one of the first companies to use strategic foresight to understand the way that the energy market might change. But Adam Kahane decided to use this way of thinking, not for making money in oil, but for peace building.
Okay.
So he flew to South Africa, and this was South Africa in the 1990s, so it was coming out of the apartheid regime and trying to make a transition to democracy. So he ran in South Africa a series of workshops called the Montfleur Scenarios Process. And I really encourage viewers to look this up. It's a fantastic example of the way in which you can use foresight and thinking about the future to draw people together, right? So in the room, he had like guerrillas and, you know, and communists and fascists and apartheid people and all the, you know, the most diverse, you know, conflicting types of people that you can imagine. But he got them to think, okay, right, we all hate each other, fine, but we've got to live with each other, right? And we've got to live in South Africa. So how do we want South Africa to go? How do we want it to develop? And they came up with 4 scenarios of different ways that South Africa might develop or not develop, based on the actions that they might take. And so one of them was, you know, one of them was basically showing the dangers of not coming to a negotiated settlement. One of them was showing coming to a settlement, but with policies that were very like populist, and that were just like bankrupt the country over time. And the final one was, I mean, I've not done the third, but the fourth was Flight of the Flamingos, which is the idea that everybody comes to some kind of negotiated solution, and they pursue sensible policies, and the country flourishes. So that's a really good example. I'd encourage people to look up as a way of using foresight for peace building. And maybe I'll get onto this later, but I did a workshop inspired by this scenarios exercise at Goodenough College.
Okay, that's great. Nice. So in terms of your experience, can you share an example of how you have used the scenario? Because you said you can.
There you go. Yeah, perfect. I preempted your question.
So can you share an example of that?
Sure. So this was recently, actually, just a couple of months ago. I did a workshop at Goodenough College, which is just above us right now, actually. And it's, for viewers, it's a international postgraduate accommodation and academic community. We're about 95% international and postgraduate students from across London's universities. So I held a series of workshops on political polarization and conflict, projecting it out by 20 years. So we're thinking about how political polarization and conflict might evolve in the world 20 years from now. Lots of different people from lots of different countries, lots of different disciplines, drawing them together to think about globally what type of decisions we need to be making to avoid the worst parts of this problem. And the 4 that we came up with were really interesting because they showed, for example, you could have a scenario in which there was a really centralized information ecosystem. I'll explain what that means in a second. And very nationalist, fortified ethno-national cultures. Right? So imagine that scenario. Imagine the state and big tech companies control narratives, control the information space absolutely, have a really tight grip on it, and we become very, very nationalist. Each country becomes just this kind of fortified ethno-national culture. What does that mean for conflict? What does that mean for polarization? How does that specifically manifest? And we draw scenarios write scenarios that help you to understand what the perils are in that situation. And then you do it for the other 3 as well. That's just one scenario, and you do it for the other 3. And from that, you can understand the specific way in which it would evolve and make policies on the basis of that. But just to sum it all up, what I think that did for the participants, the students that were there, not only was it helpful for understanding the issues, but it was also a way of acknowledging and understanding how we all have global responsibility for this. We can't just go it alone, and each country or each person just do this. Like, we need to make policies as a world, as an international corporation, in order to tackle these issues.
Okay. So when you say like we have to come together to tackle all these global issues, it's more of like we can draw examples from like economy, how we relate or depend on each other. They're not. Like, if, as example, oil, if one country go into a war, it has an impact economically to everyone else around the globe. For example, in Russia war, we had the oil price went up so much because of that war taking place in these two countries. So, like, the way that impact everyone around the globe, is it the same way that these policies, if you don't come together, then it's gonna have an impact on everyone?
Yeah, it is, and I don't want to be utopian about it, because I think there is no world government.
Yeah.
There never will be.
Yeah.
And we're becoming more. The international institutions are becoming less powerful.
Yeah.
By the day. I don't really mean that that we need to come to some kind of like international treaty about this. I'm not sure it's even possible.
Yeah.
But in a more micro way, each of us, and you'll of course be the Prime Minister of Bangladesh at some point, so it's very important for you to know. Each of us needs to be careful in the way that we speak, careful in the way that we write tweets, in the way that we send messages, and know that like each individual action that we make as leaders, but as normal citizens, it makes a huge impact and has a ripple effect. So I think less so the kind of global policy, but more so the micro, just getting people to understand that what they do really makes a difference on a daily basis in that small way.
Small way. Okay. Nice. Okay, that's a little bit chat about foresight and stuff. So we're gonna move into more of like leadership. What's your thought on leadership? Like, we are moving completely different scenarios. So
Sure.
what's your thoughts on leadership? Like, if someone is like aspiring to be a leader, is there any advice you'd like to give?
Yeah. I can't pretend to be a guru of leadership, but I've learned a couple of things along the way in fellowships and courses and things I've done. So I think that, the first and most important thing you'll hear from everybody saying this is that work on yourself first. It's really important to be intentional about how you speak and act in a very micro way, and be humble about the spheres of influence that you have. So maybe it is that on a daily basis you can only affect like 3 or 4 people around you, but acknowledge that and put the effort into doing that. Right? Not all of us are going to be born, dictators of huge countries from birth. It's you have to work in concentric circles, and get to the point where you've mastered your current level, and then move up. So I'd say for young people, if you're doing something that you believe to be boring, banal, you don't want to do your uni work, you don't really think that the people around you are that important or impressive. And I've seen this a lot, in people that are interested in being a leader in the future. What I would say is, acknowledge that level that you're at right now, seek to be the best that you can be within your constraints, and then move up. And I think each of our examples, but we're sitting right here under Good Enough College, and I feel you're making absolutely the best of what you're doing, in order to do this podcast. So I think you can be a great inspiration to your viewers.
Thank you. Okay, so in the geopolitics, you study about geopolitics, do you research and stuff. So what has been one of the most inspiring things you have learned?
Inspiring. Wow, that's difficult because it's quite a depressing subject, I'm afraid. But I think the most inspiring thing that I deal with is a role that I have with the School of International Futures. So I have a network coordination role in a hub called Peace and Security Hub. And these are peace builders that are working all over the world. So we have one of my colleagues is a peace builder in Sri Lanka, working on early warning systems for inter-ethnic, inter-religious conflict in the east of Sri Lanka. And so what I'm coming to is that just working with those individuals, young people usually, who are just passionate about what they feel is their calling in life, and are able to work in this kind of small scale way, is really, really inspiring. And with everything that's going wrong in the world, one thing that's going really, really right is the degree to which young people and people that didn't have access to technology before are being empowered by the access to technology. So to take that example of my colleague in Sri Lanka, 30, 40 years ago, there would have been very, very little she would have had very, very little access to the types of information and development that she now does. And that's because of the internet and because of these networks that I'm a part of.
Okay, so in terms of when you mentioned your colleague working in Sri Lanka, so what type of work is it? Like when you say peace building, like how does it work?
So for information about this, I check out the NGFP Fellowship at the School of International Futures. And so this is a fellowship, funded fellowship that happens every year, and they sponsor young peace builders or people working in futures and foresight in other areas to do a kind of change project. And as I say, this early warning system to detect inter-religious conflict is one that she's working on, but we have other people working in West Africa and also in global north nations, Canada, Australia, etc. And so they are able to do this at an unprecedented rate, and they're able to be resourced to do that. And the crucial part about it is that these people are from the countries. You know, they are like already embedded in the communities. And we find that actually peace building work that's done by people with the contextual information of the culture is often much more effective, much more cost efficient than people kind of flying in and doing it.
Nice. In terms of my country, so before I jump into that, like if anyone else wanted to, as example, from my country, I have so many people who work for my hometown, basically. So if they wanted to, find out more about that fellowship or join about the program, as an example, how do they
just look it up? There's a website, NGFP. That's Next Generation Foresight Practitioner, and then Fellowship. And the company is School of International Futures, and they accept applications every year.
Perfect. Okay, in terms of Bangladesh, obviously, since we moved to Sri Lanka, let's move to Bangladesh. So, what's your thought about the new changes? Like, I know you know a little bit about it. So, how do you see it? Because obviously, our government, the previous government, was there for like almost 15 years, and obviously there was a lot of corruptions, and people was not happy. Inflation was high, and obviously, most importantly, there was no democracy. So basically, there was no other party. There was no second party. There was one party ruling the country for 15 years. So obviously, there was a massive change. So how do you see it? And is there like any is there any thought like if we take this route, probably that would help us?
So I try not to speak on things that I'm not fully up to date on. So I was following this at the time of the protests and the eventual downfall of the government. But I can't say, and especially not as a Bangladeshi citizen as myself, where the country should go. I would defer to you on that. I mean, as somebody that's much more ensconced in the culture. What I will say is that I think it's just pretty shocking the degree to which money has been funneled out of Bangladesh, and you must feel this living in London, especially. There are significant amounts of Bangladeshi money drawn up in taxes, which are now sitting here in London, and it's very sad. I mean, this is the case, as you know, for India, for Sri Lanka, lots of other countries all over the world, and it hurts you twice, really, because it hurts you because you're Bangladeshi, and because this is probably tax money from your family and your friends, but it also hurts because you can't afford to pay rent in London because of this. So it's really terrible, and it needs to be stopped.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, that was one side of things. Hypothetically, if you were to be a politician right now, what are like few things you'd like to change?
Wow.
Yeah. So it's hypothetical. So there would be no controversy or anything.
Yeah. No. Okay. Well, hypothetically.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, I think the main issue that I care about is the long-term focus of the United Kingdom and its policies.
Yeah.
So I think we have made it way too hard for the next generation to flourish.
Okay.
And we've cut lots of things to do with education.
Yeah.
We've made it incredibly hard for people to buy a home.
100%.
You know, I was speaking with a mentor of mine yesterday, who he was a diplomat. So when he moved to London, he was on about £1,000 a year. So this is in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
Sounds low.
Yeah.
But a two-bed flat in Putney, quite a nice area of London, £3,000 to buy, not to rent, to buy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So you're talking 3 times the salary of like a junior ranking civil servant.
Yeah.
Right now, the starting salary for in the Foreign Office or other civil service is about £30,000, give or take. But that same 2-bed flat in Putney will probably cost you £900,000, or some there or thereabouts, depending on how nice it is. So that's 30 times. That's 30 times your salary, right? So it's effectively 10 times less achievable, and that has to change. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And what it has led to, I think, I see in my generation, I'm sure you see as well, is that people in my generation are getting to kind of like 30, 35, and still like living with housemates.
Housemates, some still live with their families.
Yeah, and it's like and that has a devastating impact on society, because it's kind of like you're not allowed to grow up. You're not allowed to own something. You're not allowed to feel like rooted in a place. And what impacts that have in our society and the way that we, if you don't have a stake somewhere, you don't really care about it. So if you allow people to buy something and to have a family, then they care about improving a place.
Yes.
Right? But we're not allowing. The house prices have got so bad that we've not allowed people to get to that point of ownership and of feeling rooted, and therefore we don't care as much about our local environment and the future of the country.
Okay, now that's a really good perspective, because the way you said, especially if you don't own something, don't care. That's a really interesting perspective. So in terms of housing crisis, if you were to have the power, how would you change it? Is it like building small houses?
Well, I suppose that's everything. I suppose that's the main lever that you would pull. There are all kinds of controversial things you could do, and very radical things. But one of them that's less radical, and I think pretty obvious, is investing in rail.
Okay.
Investing in rail, because I come from the north of England. Until recently, we were supposed to have high-speed rail all the way up into Manchester. And that project was axed by the government. It is very expensive, but it would have done wonders for the society, for the economy. And so if you are able to travel into London quickly, efficiently, reliably, then house prices become more affordable, because nobody has to live in London like full time, and especially with remote working as well. Because like there are many parts of the countries where housing is still affordable. It's just London and places where you and I are likely to work that just become ridiculously expensive.
Expensive, yeah.
So yes, build houses, but rail transport links and flexibility in working. So, for example, I know a guy who runs a biotech company in Cambridge, but he lives in Leeds.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it because he's working remotely?
He and his whole company work remotely, and then every month they go and meet up in Cambridge.
Okay.
And doing that type of thing actually is so efficient for the way that you distribute housing across the country.
Yeah.
Because people can live in less expensive areas. Yeah. Those areas are regenerated by the fact that like wealth is flowing into those areas by wealthier people living in them.
Yeah.
And those people that are living in less expensive areas can afford to live there and buy something.
Yeah.
So I think it's a win-win. Transport.
Yeah, 100%. So, you said the more flexible working.
Yeah.
But, we have this so many companies. I'm not going to name any, but there are so many companies that have this mindset, like if people are in the office, they're more productive. So, there are so many jobs that could be done remotely and which would like help the housing crisis, as you mentioned. But because of that business policy or mindset, people has to come to work in the office.
Yeah.
So how would you say, like, if you were to change that, how would you approach to those companies? Or will there be any policy that could help?
It's difficult. It's difficult because the statistics probably do show that people are a little bit, the current generation are more productive when they're in work, in an office, in an office space. But we could change that. Yeah. And actually, statistics show, I think, that younger people they lose less productivity when they're not in the office.
Okay.
And you can also think about infrastructure, certain types of working infrastructure being built more locally, such that productivity doesn't decrease. So, for example, you might be somebody living in Leeds, but whose office is in London. Yeah. You travel down for like 3 days out of the month to be in London, but the majority of the time you're in Leeds. Yeah. But the place that you go on a day-to-day basis is a co-working space that's about a mile from your house. Okay. Right? And so you're in an office, but you don't necessarily have to be in the London office.
London office, okay.
Right? Yeah. So there are things like that like companies should be maybe more flexible about providing like co-working spaces or co-working space allowances in order to keep their productivity up, but not necessarily be in London.
Yeah, and that's a really good idea, but the only downside would be it would cost the company more, right? If they're building the co-working places, maintaining, running it.
Maybe, but it's less. It's probably going to cost less than doing the same in London. If the alternative is to build an office in London.
100%. So probably government incentive could help, like those who are, if government were to make the housing affordable and they were to encourage companies to allow their worker to do work flexibly, probably government incentives, like government contribute a little bit when they're trying to build a co-working place. Is that possible?
I don't know about that. I mean, I do know that the government budget is very, very, very stretched.
Sure.
So I don't know if they would be necessarily willing to do that.
Yeah.
There are certain government initiatives to move certain departments out of London, and I think they're mixed. They have mixed success. Yeah. You might expect that the way I've been speaking, I'd be very in favour of moving the cabinet office. Yeah. Up to south of Glasgow, which I think one of their offices is now. Yeah. But I think that does introduce issues sometimes. So personally, I'd like to see a private sector driven decentralization, not one that's kind of subsidized by the government. Yeah. It has to be something that like we as a society decide to do and companies back.
So going back to the hypothetical scenarios, so the one thing you'd improve is the housing.